United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres has rejected the misinterpretations of his remarks a day earlier on Palestinian grievances that infuriated Israel. Addressing a Security Council session, the UN chief again, without naming Israel, denounced the clear violations of international humanitarian law that are being witnessed in Gaza. In remarks that especially outraged Israel, he said it was important to recognize the attacks by Hamas did not happen in a vacuum, as the Palestinians have been subjected to 56 years of suffocating occupation. Guterres said Wednesday it was necessary to set the record straight, especially out of respect for the victims and their families.
In the beginning of my intervention yesterday, I clearly stated, and I quote, "I have condemned unequivocally the horrifying and unprecedented 7 October acts of terror by Hamas in Israel. Nothing can justify the deliberate killing, injuring, and kidnapping of civilians or the launching of rockets against civilian targets." End quote. Indeed, I spoke of the grievances of the Palestinian people. And in doing so, I also clearly stated, and I quote, "But the grievances of the Palestinian people cannot justify the appalling attacks by Hamas." End quote. And then I went on with my intervention, referring all my positions on all aspects of the Middle East crisis. I believe it was necessary to set the record straight, especially out of respect to the victims and to their families.
And joining us live from Dallas, Texas in the United States to discuss this ongoing issue is Ambassador Oamien Okhidievbie, a security expert and national secretary of retired members of the Nigerian Armed Forces. A warm welcome to you, Ambassador Roy, and thanks for joining us on the news.
Yeah, thank you. It's always a pleasure and an opportunity.
Ambassador Roy, the recent call by Israeli officials for the resignation of the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres has sparked a heated diplomatic dispute. In light of this situation, how do you think the ongoing tensions between Israel and the United Nations could impact regional security dynamics? What do you make of this?
Okay, the whole media and everywhere is already saturated with different kinds of opinions. And so many of my friends and professional colleagues are taking different kinds of positions. And there's conflict everywhere, even outside of the actual conflict positions. Now, if you look at the speech from Guterres, he's talking about many years of oppression of the Palestinian people. Then he said, from my intervention yesterday, from the beginning of my intervention. You see, I want to start by saying this, that conflict must always happen. There must be grievances from people, even people living in a home must have grievances. People living in language disparities, religious disparities, ethnic disparities, political disparities, and you even within people of similar interests, they also have disparity. In Nigeria, we have the Institute of Chartered Mediators and Conciliators, and I am a fellow of that institute. The first thing to look at in every conflict is how to be reactive and not to be proactive. And how to be proactive and not to be reactive, But all agencies are tending towards being reactive. Now, if you look at the ECOWAS, we went into ECOMOG. From ECOMOG, the United Nations came to Liberia, Sierra Leone, took over the situation and created United Nations Peacekeeping Force. Now, if we want to look at the interest of the UN is positioned in every country, almost every country in the world. I can say that. And they control humanitarian interventions, they control approvals for dialogue for countries in disparity, in conflict, and they are seen to be global. Their membership is global, of global nationality, global interest and positioning. So I don't know why it will take the United Nations as a reactive body instead of proactive. Where has the United Nations been when all of these crises have been building up? NATO is also having the same problem. They didn't foresee, or they foresaw and didn't contain. ECOWAS and EU are having the same problem. They didn't foresee the coups they had, or they foresaw and didn't react. So we have this challenge, and that's where we're taking it from.
Now, you said the United Nations should be less reactive. When you look at the situation that is ongoing with the humanitarian situation in Gaza, how would you evaluate the effectiveness of humanitarian ceasefires? We've seen the United States veto, and the Red Cross and humanitarian organizations have said that the trucks that have been allowed in, it's only a tiny drop in the ocean. So with knowing the structure of the United Nations and the Security Council, and that 5 countries have the veto power, how can they push through resolution? How can they have more impact as a body in creating a humanitarian corridor for those civilian populations that are negatively impacted by this conflict?
I want to believe that the conflict in the Gaza is ageless. And the United Nations met the conflict in the Gaza in between Israel and every other country around that area. So if we keep looking at who is wrong and who is right, we would not be humane. And to be humane, we must think about the children, the helpless, and those that are victims and innocent of actions of others that are in conflict. So why are we now talking about how to position humanitarian aid? Where are those in the United Nations that are supposed to review cases of XYZ country going into conflict with XYZ country and the need for humanitarian intervention? What are the channels of openings? What are the opportunities to extract victims? What are the dialogue area to create windows of opportunity for aid to troop in to hit the sick and those that were perpetually hit by mistake? Because every other country will come out and say that hit was a mistake. Now, if we know that we have a United Nations, what are the plans on ground to say if there is a conflict between Hamas, Hezbollah, Israel, Egypt, what are the humanitarian interventions that we will need? Who and who needs to give us access opportunities? And what medical need would arise? And they need to put those laws in place to restrict the countries in conflict, to prevent the humanitarian interventions, create windows for those interventions.
Now, before I let you go, still on the spat between the UN Secretary General and Israel, he did say yesterday that it's important to recognize that the attacks by Hamas did not happen in a vacuum, but as a result of the 56 years suffocation and occupation they've been subjected to, and that led to a serious diplomatic spat. The Israeli ambassador to the United Nations described it as blood libel. In your opinion, what measures can be taken to address the concerns raised? They actually asked him to tender his resignation. How do you address the concerns raised by the Israeli officials regarding Secretary General Guterres' remarks yesterday?
For one, I want to look at it from a military angle. Now, as a military personnel, we know that in a war, there are many battles. Now, what the United Nations know and may not have concepted into their crisis reaction system is that right now in the world, we have so many assumptions that are not even accurate. We thought that Russia will just crush Ukraine in a day. We didn't know that Hamas can enter into Israel through the strongest border control system in the world and just have a carnival of death. We didn't know that there are means to enter into the strength of different kinds of countries and abuse it. Now that it has happened, the UN should be embarrassed. I think Guterres should be very, very embarrassed, because if you look at the fight going on social media, if you look at black news spreading all around that are not proper, if you look at the use of AI to control the conception of man, if you look at the cyber attack going on from this country's border to this country's cyber system to this country's database, you will understand that war in itself right now carries many battles. So if the UN is going to hold this ground, it should understand also that that area of control in the Gaza, there is always a plan to use human shield. Remember that so many countries now have anti-drone, anti-aircraft, all the kind of shields they can protect themselves. But then they still have the prerogative to utilize humans as human shield. So if that is there and is open, what has the UN done to put into place some kind of guiding and control so countries will not use that? Definitely, Hamas or whoever can go into hospitals, schools, and begin to attack. What do we do in such a situation? What is Israel supposed to do? What is Hamas supposed to do to rescue people out of this death trap?
Thank you very much, Dr. Roy Okhidievbie, security expert and national secretary, retired members of Nigerian Armed Forces. Thanks for your contribution and your insight.